Bill is about expanding inclusivity and improving access to a streamlined process to obtain a new birth certificate. My bill does away with requiring a letter of attestation from a physician for a sex change assignment surgery prior to making changes to a birth certificate. House Bill 5303 will also allow individuals to mark an X on their birth certificate for non-binary sex designation. This legislation, along with other closely related bills, are about removing the obstacles for Michiganders who seek a remedy to recognize their true identity on their birth certificate. I encourage this committee to support the legislation proposed to implement the necessity for changes in the vital record keeping for birth certificates. Passage of this policy is a win for all Michiganders, as a step in the right direction for equality and inclusivity. Thank you.
We have a question from Representative Fink.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I have a question. I think it applies to your bill, Representative Scott, but equally to 5301 and 5302. I think I understand the motivation for providing a third option other than M or F, but what I don't really understand is if a person can select X as a marker of their sex on government documents, why is the government keeping those documents? And what I mean by that is I'm not sure all the reasons that the government puts male or female on your driver's license. I assume it's largely for purposes of identification, and then of course, maybe identification of remains and things like that. But if you instead have a marker that means different things to different people, I mean, what's the use to the government having this category at all?
You can go ahead.
I'm actually not so sure that the benefit is to the government. To your point, I agree with you. I'm not sure, other than for identification purposes, there's a benefit for the government having that information. I don't think there's really many pros or cons. However, when it comes to the person having accurate information on their own records, the benefit to them is immense. For instance, if you are pulled over and you have a gender designation on your driver's license that does not match how you are presenting, what aligns with your gender identity, that can cause a lot of problems with an interaction with law enforcement. It can seem that you may have someone else's driver's license, that you are being dishonest with that officer. So I agree with you. I don't think the benefit is really with the government. I think the benefit is actually with the public.
But I guess just to follow up on this line, I mean, so if you have a marker that is X instead of M or F, I understand that it might not produce the same dissonance or whatever that that you're describing right now, but it also doesn't provide an officer very much information in making that initial determination. Is this the person? Is this the person whose record I'm looking at? I'm just saying that category becomes less useful to the law enforcement officer as well, right? I mean, basically the picture on the ID would be the useful part at that point, not really the sex designation at all.
I think that's actually the most important part. Very rarely is someone's sex designation the only thing that anyone is using to identify them, right? So it is not going to be as valuable in identifying someone, but it's also not going to be the only thing that's being based off of. I think that you and I are actually in a very similar position on that. Yeah. Did you want to add to that?
No, I
okay.
agree. I agree 100%.
Okay. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Representative Hope has a question.
I actually have two questions, if that's okay, Madam Chair. First question is, just out of curiosity, how much does it cost a person now to get their name changed once they go through all the rigmarole and potentially with the fingerprints and all that?
The cost can vary for a couple of reasons. At the minimum, you're looking at $400 to $500. For some people, I have heard people say, well, that's not that much money. It's a lot of money for me, and it's certainly a lot of money if you don't have it. But there are a lot of great people that do this pro bono work to assist people. But that is a small group of people. So in the event where you actually have to hire an attorney or legal counsel to help navigate it, that cost can go up significantly. And additionally, if there's an issue with a publication requirement, I mentioned that sometimes that can set things back. You may have to pay to have that published more than once. You may have to pay to have it published in multiple places. And if there is a delay that then starts the entire process over, you're looking at all of those costs starting over as well.
Thank you. And then if I could, I see in the current statute, and it's in your revision as well, that sufficient reason is the standard. However, the current version has a presumption kind of against changing someone's name. Would it be fair to say, even though sufficient reason isn't really defined here, that the presumption, if we were to pass this as written, would be in favor of the petitioner seeking to change their name?
I think that's fair. I mean, you're highlighting a really important point. The statute as it's written quite literally indicates that if anyone has any criminal history, it should be assumed that they are changing their name for fraudulent purposes. And that's tremendously unfair. You know, part of this is also targeted to protect victims of trafficking and domestic violence, both of which are populations that may accrue criminal charges in the process of being victimized. So to assume that a name change that may actually be stemming from trying to extricate yourself from either of those situations is rooted in a fraudulent intent is a huge problem. Absolutely. So I think that this just levels the playing field. It does allow for judges to call for hearings when they see fit. And I think that that's important. I'm not sure that it necessarily tilts the scales over towards the petitioner, but I think it does allow for a much more objective look at all of the facts rather than assuming that someone is doing this with ill intent.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Representative Devendorf.
Thank you so much for being here today. Excuse me. I appreciate the explanation for the reason we need the X for the gender marker as your resident X. I wanted to weigh in on this for a second. Of course, it's the photo on the ID and the name, which is consistent across ID documents. Ideally, that's the direction that we're going. Those are the most reliable ways to identify folks as they know themselves to be and identify themselves. Adding the X as a gender marker simply addresses and acknowledges the reality of who we are and how we present and identify, because we are acknowledging, even in this discussion, that our own assumptions about what somebody should look like based on their gender marker isn't necessarily always accurate. That people can show up and look in any number of ways, and really what is most consistent, what is most reliable, is looking at their face, is hearing their name, and is not a designation that is conflated with other things that really much of the time is none of our business. So I think until we get to the point where we acknowledge that our faces and our names and who we introduce ourselves to be is the most accurate way of being able to figure out who somebody is, we are also acknowledging that there are some folks that are just not going to fit into our boxes. And it's better for us, and it's better for everybody else to be able to know that those assumptions need not apply and will not be helpful if they do apply. And instead just to address us as a person that we are meeting that we recognize in the photo. So I do think this is acknowledging a reality and also acknowledging that perhaps gender markers on our identification documents are not the benefit we've always expected them to be, but as of right now, this is where we are, and we're going to make sure it's inclusive to everybody. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And please feel free to always ask me any questions one-on-one. My door is always open.
Thank you. We do have some follow-up questions from other members, and I will note that we do have other people that are scheduled to testify. So if I will call on my colleagues, but please note again that there are people who wish to testify, and it might be that there are other people who are better posited to answer some of these. With that, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for all your thoughtfulness on this. there's two sides to the human trafficking thing, and I'm concerned about minors who are being hidden. Their identity gets shuffled around. The perpetrator of the human trafficker coerces them into saying they want to change their identity, and then law enforcement, family, etc., can't find them. What do we do with that?
So, as it relates to minors, really nothing is changing under these bills. There is still the requirement that either both parents, or if there is an issue where there is one custodial parent and perhaps one deceased or absent parent, there is still the requirement that legal guardians or parents be the ones that are essentially like assisting the child through the name change. So this does not really, this would not be anything that would benefit human traffickers in concealing the identity of a minor.
So we still have the protections for minors.
Correct. And actually the publication piece, that is the one thing where it stays largely the same, particularly in cases where there is one parent who is not the custodial parent, but should obviously still be notified. So yes, correct. There's still protections for minors in there, robust protections.
And so what do we do with the adults then?
Which adults?
The adults that are being coerced, they're drugged, they're under somebody else's influence.
Why would they be changing their names? What would be the benefit to them changing?
They can hide the identity so that they can never be found.
Who, the traffickers?
Yeah.
I mean, so here's the thing. I don't think that a human trafficker is likely to go to the court to...
The person would be coerced into doing that.
But so are you talking about the trafficker or the victim of trafficking? What would be the point of them changing their name?
Probably if they were in their right mind and not under the influence of someone else, maybe for a year or two or whatever. I'm on the board for a
yes, no, I understand that they are often, under the influence of a variety of things like coercion, substances. But why would anyone try to get them to change their name? Why would they be coerced into changing their name?
Identity is hidden, and law enforcement can't ever go and find them. Family can't ever find them.
That's not true, though, because it's not as though their record prior to changing their name ceases to exist. And law enforcement still uses fingerprinting, so that sticks with their biometric data regardless of what their name is.
It'll just make it tougher.
I don't see how, because they can't change the fingerprints.
Representative Johnson, I will note that we are working on some human trafficking bills. I would love to have your input and insight so that we can make sure that victims have the resources that they need, and to help track down any of the horrific pieces of human beings that are trying to coerce them into doing anything.
Thank you, and I'm with that package too.
Okay, thank you. Representative Edwards.
Thank you. I just wanted to know the impact of the name change and the social security number. Would that change, or would the name just change?
Nope, just the name.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Fink, you have a follow-up?
I do, yeah. Just to follow up on this idea of a person's name being the most useful way of identifying them. I mean, we are complicating that in this pack. If this package were to go through, and we're even altering birth certificates to change names to, new names, not the birth name, and sex to either a different sex or a non-binary selection. I mean, we are complicating governmental record keeping that could become important in an individual case, right? I mean, in other words, this issue, like your name is the best way to identify you. Well, if you can change your name an infinite
I don't think
number
anyone
of
said your
times,
name is your best way to identify you. I certainly
think that's
didn't.
what I don't want to put words in her mouth. I think that's what Rep. Devendorf was saying, but
No, she was saying that the best way to identify someone is how they identify themselves. And to their point, there have been there have been cases where a trans or non-binary person has been, they are missing or they are murdered, and law enforcement put out identifying information misgendering them. And it was actually more difficult to solve that case because they were looking for the wrong person in the wrong places, because the person that law enforcement was telling people to look for, frankly, didn't exist. So I don't think that anyone is saying that the most important way for the government to keep track of someone is their name, because there is social security number, there is biometric data. So no, I don't think that that's the case. And I don't think anyone was making the case for that either.
I guess what I'm saying is you have to agree that we're at least to some degree going to complicate record keeping and identification at different courses. I mean, if at one point you submit, I mean, if you do change your name in one of the conventional ways today, right, you get married or divorced, it's not like a no sweat process to go around and get all of that taken.
I beg to differ. It's pretty easy. The actual process of changing your name is literally, as someone who's done it, has just signed the marriage certificate and your name is changed, then yes, you go to the Social
bank
Security
and everybody
office.
else. I mean, I'm just saying, like,
but none of those other identifying pieces change. So my name was Lori Tennant. Lori Tennant still exists. All of those records still follow me around because there is other identifying data. So I don't see an issue where if you change someone's name, then we're not going to have anything or any idea of who they were or what they did.
Which, of course, is not what I said.
That.
I only said that it complicates things. And so
no more than marriage or divorce.
If you're also changing people's sex designations on already existing government records, I mean, the idea that this isn't going to introduce any level of complication, that's just laughable. It's going to do something, or else you wouldn't be doing this. I mean,
I don't think that that's the case because we already have people. I mean, we had 2,500 people go through the name change process in 2023. And it doesn't seem like we've had a huge issue keeping track of those people. And it's worth noting that those people went through a more rigorous process than anyone who got married or divorced. And we don't seem to have trouble keeping track of those people either. And I don't think that anyone's gender designation is the primary way that the government is tracking them. So yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that assertion.
Representative Puhusky, have you seen any examples of what Representative Fink is alluding to happening in other states?
No, and in fact, it's worth noting that there are only 10 other states that require fingerprinting and background checks for a name change petition.
Thank you. We are going to go to some remote testimony. It's up to you. If you want to stay at the table to answer any additional questions. Okay. Representative Devendorf, you have a follow-up? Quickly, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that this is something that I designate often in many spaces, and it has not complicated anything. It is no additional effort. And also, this is following a standard that is really becoming much more of a norm.
Can one really change their biological sex? I hear the word accuracy a lot. And
it really doesn't matter for the purposes of this conversation. We're talking about identity documents, not medical standards, not a philosophical conversation about that. So with all due respect, that's not a fruitful line of conversation as it relates to these bills. It's not germane.
I guess where does it stop? Because let's say I want to be 6 inches taller. I can't really change that.
Well, as it relates to these identity documents, it stops with what's in the bills. So if you would like to bring forward a bill that says you can state whatever height you want, then I guess we can have that debate then. But the limits are quite clear in the bill. The rest of it is a philosophical conversation that is not germane, but thank you.